and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, good morning to you.
Good morning, Andrew. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you? You've just been on Australian radio, I believe.
I think so, yes.
Right.
It's a show called Box to Box, for any Aussies who happen to listen to it.
I was sort of hoping that, every time they put something to you, you would just say,
I don't answer questions.
Yeah, it would have been nice. But
15 minutes
I tried to give them some answers.
Okay. I suppose that's what people are going to be looking for in this particular episode of the podcast as well. Some answers and some discussion of what happened on Saturday at the Emirates. You had a good day, though.
I did. I mean, I almost feel like I shouldn't talk about it because I feel like people are generally very upset about the game.
Yeah.
So my good day, it may just annoy people.
Okay, well, we won't talk about it other than to say your son made his Emirates debut, probably one of the youngest ever. How mad did he go when he saw the starting lineup? Was he like, fucking Arteta, where's Gabriel?
He honestly, if he could walk, he would have walked out. He made a dirty protest, let's just say, in his nappy when he saw that starting 11. Yeah, no, I mean, we did have a lovely day. But I when the 11 came out, I'm trying to think. I saw it quite close to kick off in full, and yes, still no Gabriel. I feel like every game Gabriel doesn't play, and I say, "Oh, I'm worried about Gabriel not playing. I think there's more to it." And a load of people tell me, "You're being oversensitive, James. He'll be back. It's just rotation. He'll be back in the next game." And he's not back in the next game. He's
not. I mean, there's going to be a lot of clamour for him to play definitely in the next game when we play Manchester United. And I've seen, similar interactions about this. I mean, I can't help but be worried. And, I hear talk of a new system or whatever it is. And, personally, I get the feeling that he is not playing Gabriel for whatever reason. And the system, in inverted commas, is kind of a reaction to that because, we don't have Timber. He wasn't ready to start Zinchenko, it seems, based on what he said after the game, that he's been out for 4.5 months, so maybe he's not ready to start. And the Partey right back thing is kind of a reaction rather than an innovation because he's not picking Gabriel. Whereas, you could have made a very good case for a back four on Saturday. Even if he didn't want to start Zinchenko, you could play Kivior at left back where he has played before. You've got Gabriel and Saliba, you've got Ben White, and I think the rest kind of slots into place. So, I mean, are your worries about Gabriel exacerbated by his absence from this game?
Definitely. I mean, it's been put to me that once Zinchenko is back, Gabriel will be back. A few fans have pointed out, we'll play Gabriel when we play Zinchenko. And I accept that may be the case, but I still think Gabriel's not just there as Zinchenko's foil. He's there for a ton of other reasons. Yeah. And, one being his partnership with Saliba. I thought it was really interesting. And I thought Mikel Arteta was right when he said at the end of the game, we needed to be better in both boxes. But I don't know of a player in this Arsenal squad who can contribute more in both boxes, maybe, than Gabriel Magalhaes.
I think that's very fair.
I don't get it. I don't think it makes sense. I kind of understand what's happening with the back four in that, Arteta sort of thinks of it as a 3 and a 1, and he thinks of it as 3 defenders and 1 guy who goes into midfield. And so at the moment, instead of Zinchenko playing, he's got Partey doing that, and he thinks, well, I need, 3 more centre-halfy type people. But I still think Gabriel could do one of those jobs very, very well. I don't think it's helpful. But I think something I am going to say sort of early on in the pod, I sort of decided before I came on I was going to say it, is that I do think there are problems with the selection. I do think there are problems with the system. But when you break it down, I do think Arsenal still sort of did enough in this game that 8 times out of 10, they win it. I think ultimately their downfall was sort of mistakes and sloppiness. And I still think that although this 11 isn't the 11 I would have picked, it was an 11 that was good enough to win the game. Absolutely.
I completely agree with that. And I've been not necessarily watching from afar, but obviously, writing the blog and seeing the comments and seeing a bit of my Twitter timeline. There is a significant amount of anger out there over this result. And personally speaking, if I can compartmentalize it, my anger / frustration is with the individual errors rather than our overall performance, because I've seen us play a lot worse than that. And I think we had maybe chances, to score more goals. I think that's a discussion point anyway. We'll talk about that. But it's not really about the overall performance, having looked back at the game as well, having rewatched bits of it. I thought the first half, there was a sort of sloppiness, a carelessness to us in that first half. And obviously that manifested itself very early on. But overall, I think we played better than I thought we did. And we certainly played pretty well in the second half. But the issue for me, again, I think aligned with you, if I have some issues with the lineup, or if there are selection decisions that I would prefer to see, and that's the right back in particular, I don't really see this as an overall performance to get really angry about, but certainly those moments where we caused ourselves problems are obviously very frustrating, and those are things that I think we need to focus on. So. Yeah. The early goal that we conceded, the stat that's doing the rounds, I think it's 3 times in our last 9 home games, we've conceded a goal inside 60 seconds. Fool me once, etc., but 3 times is, there's something else going on, right? We had a load of questions as to why we think this is happening. I honestly, I can't say beyond some individual errors. But it is kind of remarkable that for all the preparation, all the organisation, all the tactical work that Mikel Arteta will do on the training ground, that we are susceptible at home in the early stages of games on a consistent basis. There's something not quite right there. Yeah.
I think 3 times you can't look at it anymore as an anomaly.
Yeah.
And there have been other moments. I remember Aaron Ramsdale making saves early in games as well, because I remember sort of referencing, and we conceded like that a few weeks ago. It's a trait in this team, and one that absolutely has to be eliminated. You cannot, respond to the final whistle, but at the first whistle, by immediately shooting yourself in the foot, time after time after time. Why is really hard to answer. I think that concentration might be a factor. I think maybe an emphasis on attacking in the opening periods of games may lead to some of this vulnerability. Arsenal for much of last season were a team who, could be very dangerous in the opening minutes, and maybe that's the balance isn't quite right there. Maybe we need to feel ourselves into games more rather than trying to start 100 miles an hour and leaving some vulnerabilities at the back. And I think as well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think if you're an away manager coming to the Emirates Stadium, the last thing you say before your team go out on the pitch is chase every lost cause in this opening 60 seconds, because we know they're vulnerable at the start.
I mean, I was just going to say that, we've talked about system and we've talked about relationships developing in this team, right? I mean, is there something to the idea that when Bukayo Saka played that pass, he was expecting a centre half to be where a centre half should be?
It's not an unreasonable expectation. I mean,
I'm not excusing the mistake or whatever, but it feels like one of those, okay, I know if I'm going to, from all the practice we've done, from everything else, that there should be, and there should have been, a player in that position. Thomas Partey moved upfield, so there was a lot of space for Pereira. And again, I'm not excusing Saka's mistake. I'm just trying to look for an explanation. And I think he played it back thinking that that is where our right-sided centre-back would be at that point.
Yeah, I've watched it a few times this morning, and I think you are onto something there. That's why I think it's hard to separate the debate about selection and system from the discussion of errors.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a relationship between those two things. And look, Saka makes a bad pass. There's no two ways about it. Shades of Martin Odegaard last season, giving the ball away on the halfway line and immediately leaving us vulnerable. I think this was worse than that, in fact, because it's basically a through ball to the striker. But when you look at the picture around him, I think Ben White's looking for an overlap. I think Thomas Partey's in central midfield. There is a huge gulf of space. And unfortunately, Saka plays his pass directly into it. I think he got his goal from the spot, Saka, but I think there are a few moments in this game that he won't reflect positively on.
Yeah.
And this was certainly one. And then obviously you've got the situation with the goalkeepers outside of his box at that time, as he's instructed to be, you imagine. A second hesitation, I think, maybe about whether he should stay or go. And yeah, I think he goes back because he thinks the striker's going to lob him.
Yeah.
And I think the striker is probably trying to lob him.
That's what I think as well, yeah.
But it doesn't look great, the way it sort of bounces in.
It doesn't, but I think it is a bit of a fluke of a finish, to be honest, because I think you're right. I think the way he shapes his body, he's trying to sort of curl it into that top right corner from his angle, and then I think he just sort of gets a good miss kick off, if you like, and that wrong,
and I don't think
Ramsdale
can come. I don't think he can just charge out because there's two strikers there, so I think the ball would just be played past him essentially. But yeah, it's a terrible way to start a game. We always say about conceding early goals, we're getting into the habit of saying this, well, it gives you plenty of time to come back. I mean, look at Manchester United, right, who were 2-0 down in the opening stages and went on to win. It is retrievable. Funnily enough, we gifted Fulham a goal in this fixture last season as well.
Gabriel,
and that was Gabriel.
Yeah.
And I was actually looking at the stats from the two games this morning because I think Arteta, in his post-match interview, might have said, if you look at those games, we were better today than we were then. They were very similar.
They are, yeah.
The possession, the shots on target, the XG even. They are sort of similar shape of game.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm not, we'll come to it, because he made some comments afterwards about goals, and I want to ask you about that. But when you look at it overall, 19 shots, 11 shots on target, 72% possession, 90% pass success rate. There are obviously things that we could do better in the game. But I think, let me ask you about this now because it's on my mind. So when you're at home and you score 2 goals, I think you have an expectation that this is a game that you should win. Mm-hmm. And Mikel Arteta said something afterwards about, let me see. It was something about scoring more often. And I was just wondering what you thought about that comment. I'm sure I've got it here. Yeah, we went 2-1 up. Then you have to defend the box with your life, and you cannot concede that goal that we've done because we should have scored 5, 6, 7. I don't know. And I get the idea that you want to score more goals. Of course you do. But I just wonder about the idea of a team which has not been secure with a 2-goal lead at times, planting that seed in their minds that they need to score more. Is it like a motivation, or does that become a bit of an anxiety if you're 2-0 up and the manager is talking about scoring 5, 6, 7 goals and you don't get one? Could that be counterproductive in a way?
Maybe. I feel like it's almost deflection because for me, there is an issue. Arsenal should be converting more opportunities than they are. I think we've scored 5 goals in our opening 3 games. And when you look at the balance of play in those games, I think you'd want to see 1 or 2 more in the net, certainly, from all the possession and chances that we've had. And Fulham will be a case in point. We underperformed our expected goals on the day. And when you look at games that teams win 4 or 5-0, it's very rare that their expected goals is 4 or 5. If it's, it's often in like sort of the 3 bracket. There's just the variance goes in your way. But Arsenal have to stop conceding goals at home. It is really, really problematic. And I think by talking about us not scoring enough, I think in a way it feels like deflection for the fact that we just concede way too many at the Emirates Stadium to sustain a challenge for major honours. I just don't think you can. I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can keep shipping 2 goals at home time after time. As you say, if it's a game where you score twice at home, it's very reasonable to expect you might win that.
Yeah.
With this team, you can't expect that.
No, it's a problem. I don't quite know how to explain the difference between home and away. I saw we had questions about it today, but again, it's one of those where it's very difficult to try and put your finger on why it's happening, whether it's they feel a bit more pressure at home, there's more expectation at home. It's not as if we're, certainly in the last little while, not as if, they're playing in front of a very grumpy Emirates Stadium and that manifests itself in sort of nervousness. There's a lot of support in there, even when the Fulham goal went in. The stadium, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, sounded pretty loud to me from where I was watching, and the response, from the crowd was really good. But you're right, it is an issue, and we've got to get on top of that. People will be screaming at their devices or whatever now, talking about maybe a more traditional back 4 or more solid back 4 might help you do that, of course. But I think the goals we conceded were more down to errors, and whether those are a consequence of not playing the sort of back 4 that we might all like, I'm not 100% sure. What did you make of Arsenal's response? It did feel like some of what happened in that opening minute set the tone, because there were, apart from Ben White spraying some incredible passes and some really brilliant switches, there was a sort of carelessness on the ball. Trossard wasn't great up front. Saliba gave the ball away. Partey gave the ball away. Odegaard gave the ball away. Maybe Saka, there was another one where he didn't quite, there was sort of a lack of precision in some of the passing, particularly in that first half.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Even so, I thought there were opportunities. There was, I think of Saka, for example, at the back post after that cross came in. Sort of miscued his header. Thought that was a good chance. Havertz had a moment in the box, didn't he? Martinelli had a couple of shots saved. I thought it was an okay response, but nothing to compare with our second half. I thought second half we were very good. First half, I don't know. We struggled, I think, for the kind of fluency we'd hoped for. And Trossard was selected up top, of course. That was an aspect of the first 11 we didn't talk about, but it didn't really happen for him. And the combination play that he's so good at, I don't think was coming off really to the degree that we would have liked. No,
I mean, it was a sort of first half performance that if Eddie had started and played like that, people would have been going absolutely crazy.
True.
As it was, I think that was maybe Trossard's worst performance for us. And look, people were asking, when was he going to get minutes? He got his minutes, didn't make the most of his opportunity, and Mikel Arteta made a halftime change. I wasn't at all surprised to see that. Normally, he gives it a little while, doesn't he, before he makes changes. But I actually wasn't that surprised to see a halftime change. I wasn't quite sure what he was going to do, but Nketiah for Trossard, and I think we did improve in the second half. I think we were better in the second half.
Definitely. I thought Eddie was really bright, actually. And, Arteta spoke about when Eddie was dropped for the Community Shield, the response he showed in training. And I think here, he was dropped from the starting 11 or rotated out the starting 11, and he produced a great response in the second half, played with real intensity and determination and threat. His movement was very, very good.
Yeah.
And the subs made a difference. We've maybe been critical of the manager for his starting selection or some of the tactical choices he's made, but in terms of his substitutions, I think he did very well. I mean, I wouldn't have foreseen as the storm was breaking overhead and the rain pouring down, I didn't anticipate this being the game where Fabio Vieira would kind of announce himself in the Premier League. But
no,
it ought to have been, really. I mean, if I feel for anyone in the wake of this result, it's him, because his contribution was enormous, and it kind of is such a shame that it didn't earn the 3 points it warranted.
It was an interesting decision by Arteta, because there was that moment with Kai Havertz that I think people got very frustrated at, where he received the ball and rather than take it and turn and drive towards goal, he just tried to lay it off to Declan Rice. I'm sort of reluctant to go too far into the weeds with the Hazard discussion, because we seem to be having it every week, and I still think he's a player who needs time. Like most players, when they join a new club, I think they do need a bit of time. But I said something to someone on Twitter about how I felt that layoff from Havertz was indicative of a player who's maybe a bit low in confidence. And some of the replies, it was like I was trying to make all kinds of excuses for him. I'm not looking for excuses. I think he should have done better in that moment. Of course he should. I think technically he's well capable of taking that ball, turning and running towards goal, or playing a more progressive pass, because, we've seen him do it even in the couple of games that we've had. But it was one of those almost like a lightning rod moment. And I think a couple of minutes later, Thomas Partey gave the ball away quite carelessly, and not for the first time in the game, and the subs came on very quickly, with Zinchenko on for Partey and Fabio Vieira on for Kai Havertz. I agree with you about Vieira. I thought he was excellent when he came on. Consistency and finding that level consistently is going to be the challenge. But, if Havertz is a guy who's maybe struggling to find his way and find his feet in this team at this moment in time, Vieira is a guy who throughout pre-season has sort of built himself up a little bit, because I saw him miss a penalty against Manchester United in New Jersey, and he looked like a guy who had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He really did. His reaction to missing that penalty in a basically meaningless friendly was so acute. I couldn't help but be a little bit worried for him. But in the subsequent games, I think he scored a penalty against Barcelona. He scored the penalty, of course, in the Community Shield. Had a couple of good little cameos here and there, and came on and was absolutely instrumental in us getting ahead. Won the penalty. Really, really sharp movement with the penalty.
Yeah, really sharp. And in this era of VAR, almost every penalty decision you sort of look at and you think, it could be, is it going to be? That was about as clear cut as it gets these days. And the defender knew it as well. But listen, that was a really sharp, incisive, diagonal run. I remember him making a very similar one at Molineux last season to knock the ball across the box for Odegaard to score. He has that capacity. He looked very, very confident when he came on. And I liked it. I was surprised to see Bukayo Saka step up, I have to say. I thought it would be Martin Odegaard, but fair play to Saka. He tucked that away. I thought it was one of his more convincing penalties. Actually. Yes,
I mean, I think even if Leno had gone the right way, you wouldn't have got that because of the precision of it. I mean, I was a little bit surprised as well. I was also a bit surprised that the referee came over and sort of made him put the ball back on the spot in exactly the same place.
That did nothing for my nerves.
No, me neither. Me neither, I have to say. But he put it away very well. And then, of course, the Eddie Nketiah goal, Vieira with the ball across. It's quite funny when you look at the goal again, that Eddie is like straining to keep his run onside. I guess it's just,
I know, it's years of force of habit.
Yeah, exactly. Force of habit. He sees the line of defenders and he's like bending his run to stay onside. The fact is, like, he could have been 3 or 4 yards ahead of the defenders there because Calvin Bassey was down injured, And it would have been fascinating to see what would have happened if Nketiah had been like a little bit ahead of that line of defenders. I think we could have been in for an all-time VAR howler there. Not that I have little or no faith in the officials or anything, but it was one of those where people were going, "Ooh, is he onside?" It's like, but there's two guys, there's two of them on the pitch. You know, it's quite funny.
And listen, purely selfishly, I like that Arsenal went for the throat in that moment, you know, and said, look, we need these points. We need to go for this. We can't be being too gentlemanly. I've got no issue with that. Obviously, I would have an issue if it was at the other end. But, you know.
It's one of those, isn't it, where you want, when it happens to your player, the opposition to sort of do the right thing there, chaps, and put the ball out. But when it's one of them, you just sort of, leave him. See, get the doctors on later. But, we did show a sort of measure of ruthlessness, if you want to call it that, to score the goal.
Yeah, it's a brilliant goal, I think, our second goal, in terms of the execution, the pass from Vieira, and the finish from Eddie is really good as well.
Yes.
And a beautifully, pointlessly timed run. It's also quite nice if you watch the replays back. Vieira's response to the ball hitting the net is amazing. So he fizzes in the cross from the left, and Eddie tucks it away. And instead of sort of running off to celebrate or anything, Vieira just sort of turns elegantly to the Arsenal bench and the crowd, like Cantona after he lobbed the Sunderland goalkeeper or whatever it was. Just like a moment of like, yes, I have arrived. I am the king. Okay,
I'm just looking at it here.
Yeah, it's he revels in it, shall we say?
Good for him. Good for him. Yeah. He's I think taken some time to settle in. He's had some difficult games. He's looked a little bit lightweight. He's looked a little off the pace at times. He's been given starts and he hasn't really made the most of them. So it's great, I think, to see him beginning hopefully to flourish a little bit, because we've talked about needing a deep squad. He is clearly a player that Mikel Arteta has faith in. So as and when he's given those moments, if he produces, and look, nearly rescued us right at the death as well, if you remember, with a great shot that Leno made a very good save from. It was a really, really good cameo for him. And I think if there is, a particular bright spot from Saturday's game, it's Fabio Vieira.
Yeah, I think it was the best performance we've seen from a player, from him for a long time, and from a player in that position. I mean, I think he has a shout, an argument to be in the conversation to start the next game based on what he contributed, which has come from nowhere, really. And it was a reminder that he does have talent. I have heard him talked about by Arsenal fans many times, incredibly dismissively. And I understand that, because he hasn't made a great impact. But he has got loads of ability. He's got loads of ability. And this was a timely reminder of that. And like I say, I'm just disappointed for him that it wasn't to secure 3 points.
Yes. So from there, and particularly when Fulham have gone down to 10 men, this is a position at home that we should, at the very least, hold on to. However, we were careless. Zinchenko was careless, giving the ball away. Corner came in. We did not defend that corner well at all. There were three guys. I think it was Jorginho, Eddie Nketiah, and Zinchenko, who were in that sort of area where the ball skidded across. That kind of front post area where you've got to get ahead on that ball. You cannot allow the ball to come into your box in that way. Three of them went for the ball. I don't know if they got in each other's way, but it was really bad defending. And then a combination of Saka and Declan Rice, maybe, not getting close enough to João Palhinha, who, by the way, is a fucking excellent player, isn't he? He's very good. Actually. He always impresses me every time I watch him. I don't watch a lot of Fulham, but he always impresses me when I see them. Good finish. I don't think the keeper can really do a great deal about that either. It's down to that carelessness to give away a corner that we just did not need to concede.
Yeah, I think it was sloppy from Zinchenko. It was sort of, unfortunately, that is part of his makeup as a player. He has these moments. And I think sloppy at the corner. I do think Bukayo Saka will be very disappointed with the way Palhinha runs off him. I wonder if the red card, in a way, took the sharpness off of Arsenal. I wonder if they made the mistake of thinking we're home and dry when Fulham went down to 10 men. Just because it's so strange to earn yourself that lead and then not do everything within your power to protect it. I don't know. It very disappointing though, and Fulham were obviously over the moon, and there was just very little time. Well, I say there's very little time to win it, but both sides had their moments. Fabio Vieira, you mentioned, producing a good save for Bird Leno, and then Adama Traore giving me a heart attack practically in the last moment of stoppage time.
Oh my goodness, that was. I mean,
he's not a bad sub actually. When it gets stretched.
Yeah,
and William Saliba's quick, and he kept with him for a while. But we know about Traore.
He tried the. I'm pretty sure Saliba was like, I did this on. I did this on Saturday or last week against Palace. I'll just slide in here and get the ball, and everything will be hunky dory. I was fully expecting Traore to go down. To be honest, I think if he had gone down, there's no question it would have been a penalty. And, this is a game that perhaps you could have contrived to lose. As it was, he got a shot away. Ramsdale saved with his face, I think. And, that was a bit of a let-off. But, there was still sort of 10, 12 minutes from the point where Fulham scored with all the injury time. There was 9 minutes of injury time. There's still loads of time. I'm not sure we did quite as much as you might like in the final stages. We had lots of possession. I'm not sure the deliveries into the box were particularly good, and I'm not sure we necessarily had anyone in the box in those final minutes to sort of sling crosses into, if that makes sense.
Well, Gabriel Jesus came on, didn't he?
I know, but he's 5'9". I'm not saying he can't. He's not good with his head. He is. He's obviously scored some headers, but I think maybe you need a little more precision. I don't quite know. Try and force Fulham back and not quite do what we did against Bournemouth, because you can't replicate that. But maybe some shots from just outside the box, if you've got Fulham pinned back a bit, might have been a better way. Maybe Fulham defended well enough to prevent that. I did want to ask you, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I thought in those final moments, the player I would most want on the pitch would be Martin Odegaard. And
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, he was withdrawn on 84 minutes, obviously once we had regained the lead. But when I think back to the late winners we got last season, the guy who's knocking on the door, who's turning the screw, who's finding the space when there appears to be none, time after time, was Martin Odegaard. Yeah. And I just felt in that final 10 minutes, we really, really missed him and his ability. I think, he's good enough that he can create something in those environments, in that context.
Oh, I agree. I was going to ask you, that's what I was going to ask you, was basically
really?
what did you make of the decision to take off Odegaard when Fulham went down to 10 men? Because, it feels almost counterintuitive to me, based on what Mikel Arteta has said at times about how he wants to control games, right? 300,000 passes, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying Jorginho's a bad player. I think Jorginho was a great sub against Crystal Palace. I think it was the perfect player to put on at that moment in time, because he's got the experience, the positioning, he's good on the ball, as and when you do get the ball with 10 men, he's calm and he can help you, etc., etc. But I didn't really understand the decision to take off a creative attacking player. If you're talking about wanting to score 5, 6, 7 goals, why are you taking off Martin Odegaard? Or at the very least, why are you replacing him with a deep-lying defensive midfielder rather than maybe putting on Emile Smith Rowe, for example? If you feel like Martin Odegaard needs to come off, and I'm not sure that he did, I don't think he looked particularly happy about it, I feel like that was a mistake.
Well, as it transpired, certainly. And you could have brought... I understand bringing Jorginho on if you want control. But there are ways you could have kept Odegaard on the pitch. You know, you could have taken Bukayo Saka off, imagine. You know, and swap things around a bit, put Vieira in one of the wide positions. There were other options. And as it turned out, we really, really missed Odegaard in that final period. If anyone was going to somehow find a winner, I think it probably would have been him. Yeah,
it didn't come. And obviously the frustration, you know, like I said at the start, for me, it's more about the manner of the 2 points dropped than the 2 points dropped themselves, if that makes sense. Obviously, I don't like throwing away a lead against 10 men, none of that. But, you know, these are, you know, it's not like Fulham pulled us apart where you have to say, well, we've got to hold our hands up. That was a brilliant passage of play from Fulham. It's self-inflicted. You know, the wound that we have picked up from this is completely self-inflicted because the goals that Fulham got were, you know, we gave them 2 assists, basically.
Yeah, I think so. And I think as well, because of last season and being in a title race with Man City, we just have entered a phase where every point is absolutely precious. You know, they showed us again the standard this weekend when they were pegged back in the last 10 minutes against Sheffield United and then found a way to win it. I think that's as well. It's not been a great weekend for us because, you know, United went down 2-0, found a way to win. Liverpool went down, found a way to win.
That was funny.
Yeah. But it's also been a weekend that's illustrated, as you said to me yesterday by text message, you just text me saying football is mad. And it is. And I think some quite mad things did happen in this game. And we have to sort of consider that in our analysis.
I mean, how do you view, or, you know, do you have an opinion on the mood, if you like? Because, you know, you mentioned it and the frustration appears to be quite palpable. How much of that is just online versus, you know, how people are reacting in the stadium or around the stadium? You know, I know friends who have gone to the games or gone to the game this weekend, you know, were obviously frustrated and obviously annoyed by all this. But do you think there is a sort of, not quite an overreaction, but are we perhaps looking at things with a fairly half-empty glass in that 7 points from 9, it's not terrible by any means. You know, you'd prefer 9 from 9, but I'm not sure people have been completely convinced by our performances. So when something like this happens, it's sort of confirmation bias in a way where you're going, well, something's not right. And then that happens. You're like, I told you, I knew it wasn't right. I mean, is there a need to not quite revert? Is this a moment that maybe Mikel Arteta will decide he's got to, in inverted commas, go back to basics? Or do you think he will look at the games and look at, you know, because I really think the first game against Nottingham Forest, it only felt nervy because, you know, obviously we let the goal in. We talked about the two goal lead, but I think we controlled that game for 99% of it, right? And Forest got a goal, and it makes you feel a little bit differently about how that game went in totality. Crystal Palace, I think we were in control until we went down to 10 men. I thought we defended really well with 10 men. And then this game where, you know, I think the overall performance was not as bad as some of the reaction I've seen, but the individual mistakes very obviously colour how you think about things.
Yeah, I think people's frustration is kind of cumulative across the 3 games. I think a lot of what's going on in terms of the reaction is about a change in expectations. I think if you think of the last 2 seasons at Arsenal, which have been predominantly sort of feel-good seasons, we've overexceeded what people expected by some distance. You know, I don't think anyone thought we were going to make a real push for Champions League qualification, and then we did. And I don't think anyone foresaw that we would be in the running for the title, and then we were. This year, the expectations are, the demand is kind of pretty close to perfection.
Yeah.
You know, we were nearly perfect last year, or for the majority of last season. And so the expectation is, well, we'll just put the cherry on the cake this year. And the demand is you've got to get between 90 and 100 points, and you've got to win the league. And so anything less than that, I think, is going to get a bit more of a reaction. Personally, I don't think we can... I think it's too early to be talking about a title. I think Arsenal just need to look at themselves and just need to get this team working. The table doesn't even take shape, really, in any meaningful way for a few months. I think that we can't be looking at others at this point. We can't be looking at what points have City picked up, what points have Liverpool picked up. We just need to focus on getting this team clicking and playing the way that we know it can, and playing with confidence. I think that's the sort of basics that we as a fan base need to go back to. And in terms of Mikel Arteta, I do have this feeling that maybe the last 20% of last season is sort of weighing heavier in his mind than the first 80%. The kind of he saw our bad end to the season and is reacting to that with change, with difference. But maybe if I was him, I would go back and watch sort of August to March and be like, what worked, rather than what didn't work.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, yeah, because I think there are some obvious reasons why we're not fluent. Because we're missing some key partnerships. You know, Saliba and Gabriel at the back, that was really, really solid. Ben White and Bukayo Saka on the right, their relationship, you know, it was even evident in the game on Saturday. You know, once Ben White went out to right back, you know, the overlaps, the contribution that he made. You know, we're missing Granit Xhaka, who, you know, whatever some people might think of him, was a very important player in this team, and who I think crucially understood 100% what Mikel Arteta wanted from him in that position. And I don't think you can necessarily say that about Kai Havertz yet. Gabriel Jesus, you know, is not there either. And I think there are relationships that he has, particularly with Gabriel Martinelli, that are really positive for us. So we're missing those aspects to our team. And
we're missing Timber as well, which I don't think should be overlooked.
No, I don't think so.
He would have played all these games.
I think so. But I'm just trying to think about what we have and how we might use it, and how we might, you know, not get back to basics, but perhaps try and find some fluency. I mean, there's, you know, an argument, I suppose, that, you know, you keep playing, you keep doing it, and, you know, those relationships will develop. But if they are coupled with the kind of mistakes that we saw on Saturday, and you end up dropping points, there's a lot less patience for that process, if you like.
Yeah, that's it. It's a bit of both. And, well, I think a looming fixture against Manchester United will offer Mikel Arteta some clarity, right? I mean, that's a big game, and a game we lost in pre-season. I know that may be sort of meaningless, but there'll be some learnings from that for sure. And it's a game that would mean an enormous amount to fans. And so any frustration that is there, which I think is in part a consequence of the raised expectation, you know, a bad result against Manchester United will be in a whole other world after that. Yeah, it might just sort of focus the thinking a little bit, if you like. Yeah, I hope so. And I know what I would do, and I would lean more heavily on the partnerships and the systems that the players intuitively know and understand. And maybe the availability of Zinchenko is the catalyst to enable you to do that. We shall see. Okay. I think we'll take a little break here. There are more talking points, obviously, but we'll cover some of those in the questions and more, which we'll do in part 2 right after this.
Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer questions that you sent to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog. Also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. Before we get into the questions, we did a competition on Friday to give you a chance to win a brilliant Bukayo Saka t-shirt from a store like 94, a store like 94.co.uk. And the random number generator has picked out Magnus Falkag and Liam Thornhill. So well done to you boys. I will be in touch by email. We'll get your details, get your sizes, and we will get those t-shirts sent out to you. If you would like to buy one, go to a store like 94, that's 94.co.uk, and you can use the code Arseblog for 10% off at checkout. And this is the last batch of these t-shirts that they're ever going to make. So if you want one, you better get on it straight away.
Yeah, nice.
Before we get into questions, Kieran Tierney has joined Real Sociedad on loan. We spoke a bit about Kieran on Friday's show. Did you watch the video?
No, I've not seen the video.
Can I play you a little clip from the video?
Of course.
Here he is.
Is this a Sociedad video?
Yeah, it was on the official Real Sociedad website, and this is Kieran Tierney.
Yeah, the Basque Country is similar to Scotland.
Exactly. I told you, Andrew.
You did. I bow down to your superior knowledge of geography and Scotland.
Scottish culture.
Scottish culture.
All those summers in Edinburgh finally pay off. Wow, there you go. I mean, it's the San Sebastian of Britain. I've told you that many times. Well, good luck to Kieran.
Yeah. I hope he does really well there. He looked very happy to be joining. Why wouldn't you? Great stadium, great city, great food. It was quite funny as well because he did his interview and he spoke in this really slow, deliberate way. I am so happy to be here. I am looking forward to playing, that kind of thing, you know, which I guess is how they're going to speak Spanish to him in the days and weeks ahead. But I think it's a really good move for him. You know, he's still a good player. I don't think he would have been, you know, completely redundant at Arsenal, but he wasn't going to get the minutes that he wants or needs, and he's going to, you know, play in a new country, new culture, play Champions League football. He's somebody who, you know, I think a lot of us connected with when he joined first, you know. I think he became a real favourite with a lot of people, and there's a lot of goodwill towards him. Always gave 100%, so I really hope he does very well there.
Yeah, I sort of had overlooked the Champions League football, but obviously that's a really big factor in the move there. And I mean, it does mean we might see him again. You never know.
Yeah.
These draws turn out.
Quirk of fate.
I think you make a good point about the connection he had with the fans. You know, we take it for granted maybe a little bit now that we like all our players, and there is this brilliant sort of reciprocal love between the squad and the supporters. But I actually think Tierney was maybe, in some ways, he was maybe the start of that.
Yeah.
You know, he was like the first guy who came in that really seemed to have like a connection with, the common fan. And I think it sort of began that sort of, I don't know, it was an early spark, I think, of the romance that would later build between squad and fans.
But I think what it also is that his style of play, if you like, was always committed.
Yeah.
And fans connect with that. You know, you can be the nicest guy in the world, you can say all the right things, but, you know, if there's a perception maybe that you're not working hard or you're not giving everything every time you play, you know, people will get on your back quickly enough. And I think that after some of the players that we had to endure, I think is a word I'm going to use there, you know, Tierney came in and really gave it fucking everything, and people were like, yes, this is what we need. These are the kind of players we need. And I think, you know, that's true now in the squad that Mikel Arteta has built, in that, you know, that is a demand that he has for all his players as a matter of course, whereas, you know, there was too much individualism, if that's the right word, or some players just going through the motions.
Yeah, I think he sort of provided a bit of an antidote, and he was, in terms of attitude and character, he was the prototype really for what Arteta would build the squad around. So yeah, no surprise he's so well thought of. And like I say, wish him all the best.
Okay, let me ask you this question from Helcarax on the Discord. He said, "Goodly morning. I love Starboy as much as every gooner, but I think it's a little unfair all the stick that Havertz is getting for that game when Bukayo gave the first goal away with a bad pass and also didn't cover his man for the equaliser. Havertz might not have been great, but he isn't why we drew. Do you think Bukayo needs competition to focus his mind a little more? Is he too much of an automatic starter with that string of consecutive games?"
Well, I think Saka had a bad game. You know, I'm pretty clear on that. Good penalty, bad game. And yeah, I would point to obviously the giveaway on the first goal, the marking on the second. I think that headed chance was much better than he made it look. It was interesting. He did an interview with Don McRae, didn't he, in The Guardian, and he was asked where he could improve. And I think one of the things he said straight off the bat was, I'm working on my heading. Still work to be done there, it would seem. But listen, he's a brilliant player. The competition point is a good one because competition now exists in almost every part of the squad, including an unusual degree of competition at goalkeeper, which I've got a question about later. But you can't really make the case that there is any real competition for Bukayo Saka. Is that just a consequence of his brilliance? I don't know. I don't know.
I think it might be to an extent,
Yeah.
in that it is very difficult to recruit in that position when you have somebody like Saka in your team. And just to sort of touch on I'm not comparing the Havertz and Saka performances, but clearly Bukayo Saka is somebody with a lot of goodwill in the tank, and that's not the case with Havertz.
He's got a huge uphill battle. He's got the opposite problem in some ways.
He's got fucking salt in his tank, unfortunately, at the moment.
He's carrying some of the Willian baggage, you know?
I think that's true. I think that I think there's a fair bit of that. You know, I don't think you can necessarily compare the deals really, or the strategic nature of the deals, you might say. But I think the Willian transfer left a lot of people pretty scarred. Then again, Jorginho's come in and he had some of that baggage too. And I think for the most part, he's managed to shed that. But of course, he's been here a bit longer and has had a bit more time.
Yes, and I think the figures make a difference. Make a difference. And also what they are being brought in to do. You know, I think Jorginho, we can all kind of shrug our shoulders and be like, yeah, okay, squad player, cover, makes sense. But when someone's being brought in to start and to replace someone who had become a kind of beloved Arsenal player in Granit Xhaka, it's a very different context. To Saka, back to Saka. Listen, I think he had bad moments in this game, but he's still Bukayo Saka. And that point of competition, it's like, how do you generate it? Who's Liverpool's competition for Mohamed Salah? You know, I don't think they've realistically got any. Even down the road at Spurs, you know, their wingers are Son and Kulusevski. It's pretty clear.
Who is the competition for Harry Kane?
Yeah.
You know, there is a point at which a player's quality and importance to the team makes that really difficult. Like, you obviously want competition, you want backup, you want that environment in which a player feels maybe just a little bit pushed in order to keep their consistency and to keep focused. But I have some sympathy with, if they've had difficulty recruiting in that position. I have sympathy for that, because it is hard to bring in a player of high quality to say, well, you're just going to be on the bench for most of the season behind Bukayo Saka.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I still think the next best right winger in the squad after Bukayo Saka is probably Gabriel Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm still fascinated to see if, now that he's back, we might see a little bit of that. We saw it a little tiny amount at the end of last season, just in rotations, him operating in those channels, operating on that flank.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should be open to that, especially with, Eddie doing well. up top, and Trossard is another potential option. Havertz is another potential option. I hope that we occasionally use Jesus to give Saka some respite here and there.
Yeah.
We've got a question from some guy called Clive Palmer.
Never heard of him.
Okay. And he says, is there too much emotion around Arsenal on and off the pitch to enable the correct environment to sustain a title run?
Too much emotion. I mean, if there wasn't emotion, there would be indifference. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's positive. I mean, you touched on it a bit in the first half, where I think the level of expectation has changed. Mm-hmm. And I think that in turn has changed, if you want to say it's changed the mood, but it does change how you think about games and how you deal with certain results or certain setbacks during the course of a season, because of how damaging it is to drop points. I remember talking to Neil Atkinson from the Anfield Wrap last season at one point, and I don't know if this went out on air in the bit that we did for the podcast, but he was talking about that feeling of when you're competing against a team like Manchester City, every small thing that in isolation probably isn't the worst thing in the world. Like, you're going to draw games during a season. That's part and parcel of football. You know, even our best title-winning teams drew games at home, you know, during those seasons when we finished top. But now the demands are so high that drop points and the frustration you feel about those drop points is exacerbated to a huge degree, because you're not expecting City to do the same thing, because mostly they don't do it, you know? So I just think it's a consequence of all that, you know? I don't really think emotion is a bad thing, really. You want people to be invested. You want them to be excited and energized and all the rest of it. I mean, maybe there's if there is perhaps a bad emotion, it might be tied to the way that we defend at home. I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, something I spoke about a bit last season, and a subject on which unusually I ended up a little bit aligned with Gary Neville, which hasn't happened many times in my life, was that I did worry sometimes about this being quite an emotional team, and that consequently when setbacks come, sometimes they can have greater reverberations, you know, and you look at the sort of run of games where we dropped points last season, and to a certain extent you feel that may have played out slightly. I mean, I don't think emotion is what makes football.
Well, yeah,
football, and it's why I'm interested in it. Like, I may be unusual in this because I am, I guess, a romantic, but I would rather have an emotional connection with a club that don't win the league than the kind of cold apathy of a Manchester City title win. That's genuine from me. Mm-hmm. I would rather care and feel invested and feel connected than win and feel cold, you know? And that's just me. Would
you feel cold if you were winning like Manchester City, though, or would it just be fucking great? You know, I know what you're saying.
I'd say
it's to do with the context of the ownership. But, you know, if once you put that to one side, which most football fans do, when it comes to, you know, I know where you're coming from, but I'm pretty sure Manchester City fans kind of love it. Or maybe they don't. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe I'm not paying enough attention because it's not my team. But when I see them celebrate, and when I see them celebrate a historic treble, I don't feel that it means as much. Now, could be complete bias on my part, but I just get the sense that there is this sort of corporate sheen on it that sort of slightly takes the edge off. But I suppose what I'm saying is, I don't know if I would wish that emotion away. Like, the last 2 years being an Arsenal fan have been among my most favourite years of being an Arsenal fan ever. And emotion has been the critical factor in that. Mm-hmm. And so, I wouldn't want to lose that. And it's been an extraordinary experience to follow the team, and particularly to be in stadiums and be part of that. And I think there are clubs that are absolutely powered by emotion. I mean, Liverpool run on emotion, that club, I think. It's their fuel, it's their identity. Now, an interesting sort of caveat to that. When did Liverpool win the league? In the season where there weren't fans in stadiums. In the emotion-drained COVID season is when Liverpool actually got over the line. So I do think it's really complex, because I wouldn't want to take the emotion out of it, but I do think there may be a tension between being emotional and being clinical, and an opposition between those two things, and maybe a better balance to be struck for Arsenal as a fan base and as a team and as a club. Can we... City feel robotic in the way they win, and we are the antithesis of that, I think, a lot of the time. And something I said that I thought about the Palace game was, like, in a way it was more boring, but maybe that's what we need, It's very complex, and I am conscious that what you say may be true. If you win, it feels emotional anyway, but maybe it's the type of emotion. Maybe it's, like you say, anxiety or fear or uncertainty.
A season is a roller coaster, and you're going to go from highs, to lows, and all the rest of it. So, like you, it's. I think it's better to feel than to be completely indifferent, or to be just sort of browbeaten, or in such a situation or state with your football club that you're like, oh fuck, I think there is something to channeling those emotions in a positive way, but I don't see it as necessarily a hindrance to what we're doing. I think there are more prosaic reasons as to why we didn't win the league last season. I don't think it's because we over celebrated against Bournemouth. I think it's because our squad wasn't deep enough and we didn't have the depth to cover. So keep the emotions high. At the moment, they're a little bit tilted one way. Hopefully, we can make them positive when we face Manchester United on Sunday. Is my question. Okay, speaking of United, Rafael Uribe, who's at Rafael Uribe 123, says, simple one today. Who starts at left 8 against Manchester United if you're in the hot seat?
Declan Rice.
Okay.
Is my answer. I've thought about this quite a lot. I think Fabio Vieira deserves it, given what he did against... Who were they? Fulham.
Yeah.
But I think I would play a very familiar back four, Partey at the base of midfield, Declan Rice to his left, Martin Odegaard to his right.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I would do as well.
Yeah. I just think it's solid. There are some more attuned relationships there. I think Rice he'd have a lot to learn. It's not a straightforward role for him to step into. But I think that's what I would do. And I think at the time it's right. Like you, I've been worried about Kai Havertz since he signed. Not because I think he's a bad player, but just because, as discussed, I think he's got all this baggage that he has to contend with. And we are an emotional bunch, as discussed.
I mean, do you run the risk of... I mean, he's a big boy and he understands the game and all the rest of it, but how do you think Mikel Arteta might view... like if he's a bit low on confidence? Does taking him out of the team, does that protect him? Does it damage him further? Or does it give him an opportunity to sort of, okay, let's see what happens against United? I mean, the ideal situation for Kai Havertz, I guess, is, given that we've both chosen a team without him in it, is that at some point in that game he can come on and make a valuable contribution, sort of start to build that little bit of momentum that I think he needs.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, I know what you mean. Like, does it risk diminishing his confidence or anything? Funnily enough, I think it's almost a protective thing. Like, I think this player is adapting. He's been good in moments, less good in other moments. I think it would be an exaggeration to say he's been bad consistently. I think he looks like a player learning a role, and part of learning that role can be stepping out and taking stock, even watching from the bench, working on things in training. We are constantly being told this is a squad in which everyone's going to be rotated, everyone's going to play games, everyone's going to miss games. And I just feel that for this specific opponent, this is the time for him to sit down.
Yeah.
He could well be back in for the next game. I just think we should. That's who I pick, Declan Rice in that position.
Yeah, me too.
Do
you think he will?
I have no idea, Andrew. I really have no idea.
It's hard to predict, isn't it? It is kind of hard to predict. It has been anyway this season, and I think there's something quite interesting in the embracing of the idea that we need to be more tactically, have a bit more variety in terms of tactics, or be a bit more unpredictable, and people saying, yes, that's good. You need more than one way to play. There's, more than one way to skin a cat, etc., etc. When it comes to Premier League football, it's a really unfortunate turn of phrase, that, isn't it? Yeah. Skinning cats. But my point is, when it doesn't quite click straight away, there's a clamour to go back to what we all knew and were comfortable with.
Absolutely, yeah. Peel a potato. That would be a much more nice phrase. More than one way to peel a potato.
Is
I think
there,
that's
though?
True.
I mean, with a peeler, with a knife,
you could use
old
a
school spoon. I suppose it would take ages, and you get
your fingernails if you're desperate.
Yeah, let's use that one
from now on. For the cats everywhere, they've been through enough with Kurt Zouma and what have you. We did have a question to that effect from Harron B, which I'll just sort of mention, who said, with Vieira seeming to take a step up after not playing much last season, do you think Havertz may also need a season to settle in before becoming a regular starter? I mean, I don't know about a season.
No, I don't think a season. Let's remember that last season was Fabio Vieira's first season in the Premier League. He arrived with an injury, and he wasn't like uniformly bad last season or anything like it. He just was a little off the pace, you might say, in a couple of games where he didn't really produce what we hoped he might produce, but he still, I think I said this before, he's something like 8 goal contributions throughout the season, 2 goals, 6 assists, something like that. So it wasn't like a complete bust, whereas Havertz obviously has plenty of Premier League experience. I think part of why you drop £65 million on a player is that they are ready. They're Premier League ready. That doesn't mean that they're going to come in and absolutely hit the ground running. I mean, I think Declan Rice has to an extent. But I think maybe what Havertz is being asked to do, there's maybe a bit more learning for him in that sense. Maybe he needs to just get lessons off Declan Rice, because Declan Rice has learned so much in the last 4 or 5 weeks. He could get like extra tuition.
Copy his homework.
Yeah, copy his homework.
Well, listen, talking about team selection and the next game, Arslan Hanani said, does Ramsdale start the next game?
I don't see why he shouldn't, to be honest. I don't think he did anything particularly wrong in the game. I know that first goal looked bad for him, but it's really more about the bad pass and the poor positioning from our defence as anything else. He did make a big save at the end. I thought he was good against Crystal Palace, particularly when we were down to 10 men. I think that presence he has was evident and really important. So I would start Ramsdale next game.
I think he will. I am sort of aware that I think it was 3 games in that Bernd Leno was switched out for Aaron Ramsdale a couple of years ago. But I think the problem he's got now is that every time the ball goes in the net, people are going to ask this question.
Yeah.
And as long as David Raya sat on that bench, he can't concede a goal. So it's tricky, but I think he will keep his place. I don't get the sense that Mikel Arteta is in a hurry to make that change. I think it would take a sort of a consistently poor run of form from Ramsdale for it to happen. But, it's a conversation that will keep coming up as long as we've got both these goalies. And so I thought it was worth addressing on the show.
I suppose every error or perceived error is more under the microscope now than it has been,
Yeah. I mean, one thing to be aware of, I think, in discussion about our goalkeeper more generally is that starting high position. Last season Ramsdale was lobbed from the halfway line because basically if we give possession away on the, in our defensive third when we're high up the pitch, he is going to be out of his goal.
Yeah.
So it's all the more important we're secure in those situations because otherwise he or David Raya are going to be very isolated and stranded.
Yeah.
So giving it away on the halfway line when we've got, nobody back is, we've got to cut that out.
Yes, 100%. Here's what, actually, we sort of touched on this, but there's another question. Vodka Martinelli says, can you help me quantify why I feel like we would have gone on to win 3-1 if we brought on Smith Rowe for Odegaard rather than Jorginho? But Brad Dennett says, should we sell Smith Rowe if we're never going to use him? Could use the funds. I honestly forgot we had him until I looked at our bench at halftime.
Well, we're all treating Fabio Vieira's performance as really good news. I guess the one person it wasn't good news for was Emile Smith Rowe, who, waits for his opportunity. I mean, at least he is on the bench. There are players not on the bench,
That's true. I suppose just a small thing on the Vieira introduction was that in pre-season, I think he played most
predominantly on the right
of the minutes on the right, and here he was chosen to play on the left, which is
Smith Rowe had got those minutes on the left in pre-season, so that doesn't look great for Emile. I've kind of always thought that this would go the same way. I hesitate even to say this because I really like Emile Smith Rowe, and I think there's definitely a version of reality that plays out where he does find a role in this squad and does make a big contribution. If I had to say, I think he'll go next summer. Regretfully, I fear that's the way this will go. That he was kind of, given this opportunity. They didn't want to sell him. They wanted to keep him for depth. But I fear that he's not going to get the chances that he wants to play enough football unless there's a spate of injuries, which there could be.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm reluctant to make any definitive comment on this 3 games into a season because it's still very, very early days, and we've seen
just 3 games, Andrew.
Just
as
3
a wise
games.
Man once said.
Don't know who that was, but we're sitting here today extolling the virtues of Fabio Vieira after one performance.
Absolutely.
And it can be just that sort of changes the mood or perception around a player. That I think it's absolutely vital that when Smith Rowe does get chances, he makes the most of them, because it can change and how people think of you as a player, and maybe even how the coach thinks of you can change based on what you do on the pitch. So if he comes on in a game and plays well and makes a contribution, whether it's a goal or an assist, or if he gets a start and plays well, we could be talking about Emile Smith Rowe in a very different way, because it doesn't take much to change, how people are thinking about you. But, 3 games in, he hasn't really played. I think the context of the Palace game, means you're leaning into the defensive side of your bench much more than the attacking side of your bench. But I would have liked to have seen Smith Rowe for Odegaard. I think I would have preferred that kind of change, that even if you do contrive to give a goal away against 10-man Fulham because you're attacking or whatever it might be, I think I would prefer not to give the goal away, obviously, but I think I prefer the sort of mindset where, okay, we're not happy at 2-1. We want to put this game to bed. We want to score a 3rd goal, maybe a 4th goal. I kind of like that idea a bit more,
Yeah. I think Mikel Arteta has said that the players who aren't playing will get opportunities in the weeks to come. And I think it's very difficult for us to assess the use of the squad until the cup competitions begin. And we see, what opportunities they're granted there, and proper rotation begins with Champions League in the midweek and Premier League at the weekend. I think once we get to kind of October time, we'll be in a position to talk, more definitively about what opportunities players are getting. It's 1 game a week at the moment, and there's only so many that get on the field.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions about Mikel Arteta, actually. So here we go from Marty. At the start of Arteta's reign, I think I'm right in saying many of us felt he often overanalyzed things and made things more complicated than necessary, especially against other top teams. Do you think he's fallen back in this old habit, knowing that this season we might be a team to beat? And there was also a question from James Gilheany, who's at JJ Gilheany on Twitter, who says, are we missing Steve Round, a sensible head in the room to stop Arteta indulging in his worst habits?
Yeah, I had a similar question, actually, which was about, from AJ Sheepers, asking about the coaching staff around Arteta and the departure of Steve Round. Hard to know, isn't it? We're not in those rooms. So we don't know to what degree, those influences have sway on Mikel and his decision-making. Steve Round was obviously one of the more experienced people in that group. And from the bits and pieces I've heard, someone who, was prepared to disagree with Mikel at times.
That's why he's gone.
And that's why he had to go. That's why he's been assassinated.
Nobody's seen him.
Nobody's seen him.
Where is Steve Round?
But, so I don't know. I'm not sure about the overthinking thing. I know that it exists. I kind of feel like if you win, you haven't overthought it. You're a tactical genius. And if you lose, you've overthought it. I think really what happened is we used to lose more games. And so we used to say he's overthought it. I'm not sure he's changed that much in terms of his sort of overarching philosophy. And I think he views this season as different. I think he feels that the challenges Arsenal are going to face this year in terms of the way opposition will set up against them, in terms of balancing the Premier League and the Champions League, are different and require a different approach. I just think that you shouldn't throw the potato out with the bath, with the dishwashing water,
Yeah.
I was going to do baby out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but you're obviously it's a sensitive.
We're trying
subject.
To clean up some of these idioms,
Yeah, babies and cats and potatoes.
We want to protect babies and cats where we can.
Yeah, we do.
But yeah, I do think that. I think it's so basic to say back to basics, but I think a dose of that this week before the United game would genuinely have some value.
We had a question from Christine, who's at HelloMoto237, who said, "Goodly morning, gents. Who's the wrestling fan that's working at the Emirates? The broadcast always manages to catch the tail end of themes being played, which has been an absolute treat for me. I was especially moved by the tribute to Bray Wyatt. Am I pronouncing that right?
You are. The answer is the man on the PA playing the tunes.
Peter Majuzzi, who is, exactly. He's on the decks And we did an interview with him on the podcast actually a few weeks back. So if you want to find out more about Peter, you can go back and listen to that particular episode. So
he sneaks in a lot of wrestling themes just as the team are coming out for the second half. One for the aficionados.
You're a big wrestling fan, yeah.
Sad news. Bray Wyatt, real name Wyndham Rotunda, was an incredibly creative guy. Like, had an amazing eye for sort of iconography and imbued everything he did with sort of like, wrestling's fundamentally quite a sort of kitsch thing, but he sort of genuinely, I think, brought like an artistry to it. And heart attack at 36, really, really sad.
It's no age, is it?
Way too young.
Yeah, I don't know much about the wrestling world, but I saw the reaction online. It obviously confirms basically what you're saying about him. So
it touched a lot of people. News. So very sad news and a nice little tribute from Peter at halftime.
Have you got one more?
Good question. Do you know what? We've maybe done it, but I had a lot of questions about just generally how are you feeling about United. Like Brock Strongo on the Discord said, I know you do a preview podcast, but he said, how are you feeling about the United game? From a fan base mood point of view, it feels like a lot could be riding on the performance and the result.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that. But at this moment, as we're still trying to process the Fulham game, I'm not really feeling anything about the Manchester United game yet. But as the week progresses, and obviously we will talk about it later in the week and do a preview podcast. I mean, it's always a big game. It's always a big game. And I think this is one perhaps where, either the worst fears are realized about our start to the season, or we kick on and this is the spark that gets us going. So from that perspective, I think it is obviously a huge game.
What I would say is that they don't look like a team that can defend. They conceded 2 in the first 10 minutes. I mean, people in our glass houses shouldn't throw potatoes, but they conceded 2 in the first 10 minutes against Forest. They lost at Spurs. They haven't been convincing at all. And if anyone saw their opening weekend game against Wolves absolutely took them apart and were robbed of a penalty. Should have got something there. So they have vulnerabilities. It's not like we're coming up against United, who are resurgent and brilliant. Arsenal should be better than United. This is a game we should be able to win, I think. And I'm hoping, as we said earlier, it just sort of sharpens minds.
I know exactly what you're saying. But Fulham at home against 10 men is a game that Arsenal should win. So I think that is what's at the back of people's minds, is that, like, even if United can't really defend, we are capable of giving gifts to the opposition like fucking football Santa Claus.
I had another question, actually. Which I thought you would probably hate, actually, but let's do it anyway. Ian Sandwell on Twitter said, what's more likely to happen in the coming week? Partey not being used as right back against United, or Gabriel leaving for Saudi Arabia?
What's more likely to not happen?
What's more likely to happen? So Partey playing in midfield, or Gabriel leaving for Saudi Arabia?
I would say Partey playing in midfield.
Yeah, I don't think they can let Gabriel go.
No, I think it would be crazy at this point. Unless the money was absolutely bananas and we were 155% sure that we were going to be able to bring in a quality replacement who could settle in and hit the ground running really, really quickly. There's no way we can let that happen. Whatever's going on, they need to build a bridge and get the fuck over it. And, it would be really surprising to me if he left.
Yeah, me too. Famous last words. They'll be playing that clip when he's paraded in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, my goodness. I have one more here from Senior Grey Dog. He said, after 3 games, which team has surprised you the most and which team has not met your expectations?
In the Premier League?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question. Which team has surprised me the most? West Ham,
Yeah.
I have to say. I thought they would really struggle. And there've been a lot of tensions there between a sporting director and their manager about the direction of the team and the club. But they beat Chelsea, and to go and win away at Brighton is a terrific result. So they're riding high, second in the table. Who's not lived up to my expectations? I think I would say United. I thought they'd be better than they've been. I know they've won 2 of 3. I thought they'd look more convincing a year into Ten Hag and with signings that he's made. I expected more from them early on, and they beat us in pre-season, of course. So, yeah, I'd say they've not quite lived up to expectations. What about you?
I suppose not lived up to expectations is Newcastle to an extent, because they've lost 2 games. I mean, I fully expected them to be complete wankers, which I think they are, and that's what made the Liverpool result quite funny.
Right. I actually didn't see the game.
Oh, it was hilarious. It was hilarious. Yeah, because they were down to 10 men, possibly could have been 9 men. With the Trent situation,
Oh, yeah. I mean, quick thing on that. I said I don't always agree with Gary Neville. I watched him on Monday night saying Tomiyasu had to go, basically, for the 2 yellow cards against Palace. And then he said the referee probably got it right, keeping Trent on the pitch for doing, as far as I could tell, exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the thing here is it's that Gary Neville's a little prick.
Right.
And that explains everything. I'm fully on board the completely hate Newcastle train now,
Yeah.
I mean, their assistant manager shushing Jurgen Klopp was, dude,
Tyndall,
sit down.
Yeah, he's a bit of a...
Sit down, buddy. So it was a bit of poetic justice in that regard. And, Darwin Núñez, when he had that first chance, there's sort of every chance that it could have gone fucking over the stand and out of the stadium, given the way some of his finishing has been. But he had a look and he really finished it brilliantly in off the post. And then the second one, Newcastle's defending down their left-hand side was not good. Maybe they need a left back or needed a left back. Bit late now, fuckers. So that was quite funny. Who has exceeded expectations? It's sort of, I suppose, West Ham again, obviously because of the game that they won against Brighton more than anything, which is another illustration of just how fucking crazy football is. When you look at the stats of that game, it's mental. So
my early takeaway about this league is I think there are more bad teams this year.
I agree.
I think, when you look at the bottom, you've got Burnley, Luton, and Everton in the relegation zone. My God, the only thing louder than the thunder at Emirates Stadium were the boos at Goodison Park.
James, can you hang on one sec? There's somebody at my door right at the death. We're getting doorbell music at the
late
death.
Call up for doorbell music.
Okay, one sec. I'm back.
You're back.
I'm back.
All good?
Yeah, but guess what it was?
Tell me.
It's the man delivering a live on-air unwrapping of our third kit. Ooh, it's lovely. It's really nice.
Great.
I like it. So there we go.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So you were saying bad teams.
Oh, bad teams. Yeah, I think there's a few. So you've got the bottom. The bottom six are Wolves, Bournemouth, Sheffield United, Burnley, Luton, Everton. I think a lot of clubs are going to beat up on those guys this season.
So, yeah.
Maybe you throw Forest in there, maybe. But I actually think Forest have been a bit unfortunate so far. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of points to be picked up, and I think that's going to sort of slightly skew the league. I think it might become quite sort of polarised. We shall see.
Okay, well, look, we will talk more about the Premier League in the 30, the podcast that we do exclusively for our Patreon members. We'll have that for you a little bit later on this afternoon. We'll round up all the weekend's Premier League action as we do every week. For now, thank you as always for being here. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.